She had already accepted her fate. Simone Adeyemi stood in that cold, gray courtroom, her wrists bound by metal cuffs that had already left bruises on her dark skin. The orange prison uniform hung loosely on her frame, a constant reminder of the 18 months she had spent rotting in a cell for a crime she never committed. The guards gripped her arms tightly, as if she was some dangerous criminal who might escape at any moment. But Simone had no fight left in her. Not anymore. Her mother sat in the back of the courtroom, tears streaming down her face. Her younger sister held their mother's hand, both of them looking at Simone with a mixture of heartbreak and helplessness. The judge was reading something, his voice droning on about appeals and sentences and legal procedures. Simone wasn't listening. She had stopped listening months ago when the justice system had failed her completely. But then she felt it. That strange electricity in the air that only one person could create. That magnetic pull that had drawn her to him in the first place, before everything fell apart, before her entire life was destroyed. She turned her head slowly, and her heart stopped. There he was, Park Hyun-woo. The man who had ruined her life stood at the entrance of the courtroom, flanked by 4 men in expensive black suits. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jaw sharp enough to cut glass, and those cold, calculating eyes were fixed directly on her. He was wearing a 3-piece suit that probably cost more than her entire apartment. A gold watch gleamed on his wrist, and his presence commanded the attention of everyone in the room. The whispers started immediately. Everyone in that courtroom knew exactly who Park Hyun-woo was. The heir to the Park Empire. The Shadow King of Seoul's underground. The man whose family controlled everything from legitimate businesses to operations that no one dared speak about in daylight. He was the Korean Mafia boss, and he had just walked into a public courtroom like he owned it. Because in many ways, he did. Simone's blood ran cold. What was he doing here? Had he come to watch her final humiliation? To see her dragged away to spend the rest of her youth behind bars for his crimes? The judge had stopped speaking. The guards had frozen. Even the court reporter's fingers had paused over her keyboard. Hyun-woo began walking forward. His footsteps echoed in the silent courtroom, each one deliberate, powerful, terrifying. His men followed behind him, creating a wall of intimidation that made the security guards step back instinctively. Simone's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She wanted to run, wanted to scream, wanted to demand that someone remove this monster from her presence. But she couldn't move. He stopped directly in front of her, so close she could smell his cologne, that intoxicating scent that had once made her feel safe. His eyes bore into hers, and for a moment, the entire world disappeared. Then he spoke. His voice was deep and commanding, cutting through the silence like a blade. He said, "Stop. She is innocent." The guards looked at each other in confusion, their grip on Simone's arms loosening slightly. The judge finally found his voice and demanded to know who Hyun-woo was and what he was doing in his courtroom. Hyun-woo didn't even look at him. His eyes never left Simone's face. He reached up and touched her cheek gently, his thumb wiping away a tear she didn't even realize had fallen. And then, in front of everyone, in front of the judge and the guards and her crying mother and all the cameras that had started flashing, Park Hyun-woo, the most feared man in South Korea, pulled Simone into his arms and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was consuming, possessive, a declaration that spoke louder than any words ever could. He kissed her like she was his oxygen, like he had been drowning without her, like nothing else in the entire world mattered except this moment. When he finally pulled back, Simone was trembling. He looked at the judge and said that he was confessing. He said the crime she was convicted of was committed by his organization. He said she was framed because she was close to him, because his enemies wanted to hurt him through her. He said she was innocent, and he had come to set her free. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Now, if you are already hooked and you want to know how Simone ended up in this situation and what happens next, do me a favor right now. Hit that subscribe button, tap the like button, and drop a comment telling me if you think Simone should forgive Hyun-woo. Your engagement helps this channel grow, and I promise this story is going to take you on an incredible journey. Now let's rewind and see how this all began. 18 months earlier, Simone Adeyemi was living her best life in Seoul. She had moved to South Korea 3 years ago from Lagos, Nigeria, chasing a dream that had seemed impossible back then. She had always been fascinated by Korean culture, had taught herself the language through K-dramas and YouTube videos, and had worked multiple jobs to save enough money for a plane ticket. Her parents had thought she was crazy. Her friends had told her she would never fit in. But Simone was stubborn, and she had something to prove. Now she was working as a translator for one of the biggest entertainment companies in Seoul. She had a cozy apartment in Hongdae, a group of friends who adored her, and a life she had built entirely on her own. She was happy, until the night she walked into that restaurant. It was supposed to be a simple dinner meeting with a potential client, a wealthy businessman who needed translation services for an upcoming international conference. Her boss had given her the assignment, promising a generous bonus if she landed the contract. The restaurant was in Gangnam, one of those exclusive places where a single meal cost more than her monthly rent. Simone had dressed carefully that night, wearing a sleek black dress that hugged her curves and heels that made her already impressive height even more commanding. She had felt confident walking in. That confidence lasted exactly 30 seconds. Because when she was escorted to the private room where her client was waiting, she found herself face to face with Park Hyun-woo. He was sitting at the head of a long table, surrounded by men who looked like they could kill someone without blinking. The air in the room was thick with tension, cigarette smoke, and something dangerous that Simone couldn't quite identify. Hyun-woo looked up when she entered, and his eyes widened slightly. It was a small reaction, barely noticeable, but Simone caught it. She caught everything about him in that moment. The way his dark eyes seemed to pierce right through her, the way his lips curved into the ghost of a smile, the way his entire body seemed to lean toward her like she was a magnet. He asked if she was his translator. His voice sent shivers down her spine. Simone wanted to turn around and leave. Every instinct in her body was screaming that this man was dangerous, that getting involved with him would be the biggest mistake of her life. But she needed this job. She needed the money. And some foolish, reckless part of her was drawn to him in a way she couldn't explain. She straightened her spine and said yes, she was. She asked if he was ready to begin. That first night, she translated for a business meeting that was clearly a cover for something much darker. Men spoke in coded language about shipments and territories and rivals who needed to be handled. Simone pretended not to understand, keeping her face neutral and her voice steady. When the meeting ended, Hyun-woo asked her to stay. His men filed out of the room one by one until it was just the two of them, alone in that private space that suddenly felt much smaller than before. He poured her a glass of wine and slid it across the table. He told her she was very good at pretending. Simone's heart rate spiked. She asked what he meant. Hyun-woo smiled, and it was the most terrifying and beautiful thing she had ever seen. He said she pretended not to understand what they were really discussing, but her eyes gave her away. He said every time they mentioned something dangerous, her pupils dilated slightly. He found it fascinating. Simone should have denied it. She should have played dumb, finished her wine, and gotten out of there as fast as possible. Instead, she looked him directly in the eyes and told him that maybe he should be more careful about what he discusses in front of strangers. The air between them crackled. Hyun-woo leaned forward, his gaze intense. He said she wasn't a stranger. He said he knew exactly who she was. He said Simone Adeyemi, 27 years old, from Lagos, Nigeria. Translator. Lives alone in Hongdae. Sends money to her family every month. Has no significant romantic relationships. No criminal record. No ties to any rival organizations. Simone's blood ran cold. He had investigated her. Before she even walked into that room, he had already known everything about her. She asked why he investigated her. Hyun-woo stood up and walked around the table until he was standing right in front of her. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He said because he wanted her. He said he wanted her to work for him, exclusively. He said he would pay her 5 times what she was currently making. He said she would have protection, resources, and anything she desired. Simone stood up, putting them at eye level. She was tall for a woman, especially in heels, and she refused to let him intimidate her. She said she didn't work for criminals. Hyun-woo's eyes darkened. He reached out and tucked a strand of her braids behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her skin. He said everyone works for criminals. He said some are just more honest about it than others. That should have been the end of it. Simone should have walked out of that restaurant and never looked back. But she didn't. Over the next few months, she found herself drawn deeper and deeper into Hyun-woo's world. He kept finding excuses to hire her. Meetings that required translation. Documents that needed review. Events where he needed someone intelligent and sophisticated by his side. Every time they were together, the tension between them grew stronger. The accidental touches became deliberate. The lingering glances became heated stares. The professional distance became something much more personal. Simone knew it was wrong. She knew she was playing with fire. But Hyun-woo made her feel things she had never felt before. He challenged her, respected her intelligence, treated her like an equal in a world where she had always felt like an outsider. And then one night, the tension finally broke. They were in his penthouse apartment after a particularly stressful meeting. His enemies had made a move against one of his businesses, and Hyun-woo was furious. He was pacing back and forth, speaking rapid Korean into his phone, his jaw clenched with barely contained rage. Simone sat on his couch, watching him, waiting for him to finish. When he finally hung up, he stood by the window, his back to her, looking out at the glittering Seoul skyline. She asked if he was okay. He didn't turn around. He said no. She stood up and walked over to him. She placed her hand on his back, feeling the tension in his muscles through his expensive shirt. He turned around so fast, she didn't have time to react. His hands cupped her face, and his eyes searched hers with an intensity that took her breath away. He said he knew he should stay away from her. He said he knew he was putting her in danger just by being near her. He said he had tried to resist, tried to keep his distance, but he couldn't anymore. Simone's heart was racing. She asked what he wanted. Hyun-woo pressed his forehead against hers and closed his eyes. He said he wanted her. He said he wanted all of her. He said he wanted her in his bed, in his life, in his heart. He said he wanted to wake up next to her every morning and fall asleep holding her every night. He said he wanted to give her the world and protect her from everyone who would try to take it away. Simone should have said no. She should have remembered all the reasons why this was a terrible idea. Instead, she kissed him. That night changed everything. Simone became part of Hyun-woo's life in every way. She moved into his penthouse. She attended his meetings. She met his inner circle, the loyal men who would die for him without question. She learned the truth about his organization, the violence and the power and the constant threat of enemies who wanted to destroy everything he had built. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was nothing like the life she had imagined for herself. But she loved him. God help her. She loved him with every fiber of her being. And he loved her too, showed it in 1,000 different ways every single day. The way he looked at her, the way he touched her, the way he whispered her name like it was a prayer. For 8 months, Simone lived in a dream. Then the nightmare began. It started with a warehouse raid. Hyun-woo's organization had been storing something there, something valuable that Simone didn't ask about because some things were better left unknown. The police showed up with warrants and guns and a media circus that broadcast the whole thing across every news channel in the country. Hyun-woo was supposed to be there that night. He was supposed to oversee a shipment that was worth millions. But at the last minute, he had changed his plans because Simone wasn't feeling well, and he wanted to stay home and take care of her. So when the police arrived at the warehouse, they didn't find Park Hyun-woo. They found evidence that someone had been there. Fingerprints on a glass. Hair on a pillow in the back office. And most damning of all, security footage showing a woman's silhouette entering the building earlier that day. A tall woman with dark skin and long braids. Simone. She didn't understand what was happening when the police showed up at Hyun-woo's penthouse the next morning. She was still in her robe, drinking coffee and watching the news coverage of the raid. They burst through the door like she was a violent criminal, threw her to the ground, handcuffed her while she screamed for Hyun-woo, who wasn't there, who had left early for a meeting, who had no idea what was happening to her. They charged her with everything. Smuggling, money laundering, conspiracy, criminal enterprise. They said she was the mastermind behind the operation, that she had used her position as a translator to gather intelligence and facilitate illegal activities. It was insane. It was impossible. But somehow, they had evidence. Fingerprints she had never left. Footage that had been manipulated. Witnesses who claimed she had ordered shipments and signed documents. Someone had framed her. And the most devastating part was that she knew exactly who was responsible. Kim Sung-ho. He was one of Hyun-woo's lieutenants, a man who had been with the organization for over a decade. He had never liked Simone, had made it clear from the beginning that he didn't think she belonged in their world. He watched her with cold eyes, spoke to her with barely concealed contempt, and whispered things to the other men when he thought she couldn't hear. An outsider. A liability. a distraction that would get their boss killed. But Simone had never imagined he would do something like this. The trial was a mockery of justice. Simone's public defender was overworked and underprepared. The prosecutor was a man with political ambitions who saw this case as his ticket to fame. And every piece of evidence, every witness testimony, every document presented pointed directly at Simone. She looked for Hyun-woo every day. In the courtroom, in the visitor logs at the jail, in any form of communication. She waited for him to appear, to use his power and influence to save her, to prove that what they had was real. But he never came. Weeks passed, then months. Simone's hope began to die. She heard rumors from other inmates. That Park Hyun-woo had moved on. That he had a new woman in his penthouse. That he had abandoned her to save himself, to avoid any connection to the scandal that was consuming her life. The betrayal cut deeper than any prison sentence ever could. Simone had given him everything. Her heart, her trust, her entire future. And he had let her rot in a cell without so much as a single visit. She was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Her mother flew in from Nigeria, weeping and begging and asking how this could happen to her baby. Her sister looked at her through the glass partition with eyes full of pity and confusion. Simone had no answers for them. She had nothing left. The prison was cold and harsh and nothing like anything she had experienced in her life. She was an outsider there too, a black woman in a Korean prison, speaking a language that set her apart, carrying herself in a way that made the other inmates either fear her or resent her. She learned to survive. She learned to keep her head down, do her time, avoid trouble. She stopped hoping for rescue or vindication or anything beyond the gray walls that surrounded her. And she tried desperately to stop thinking about Park Hyun-woo. But he haunted her dreams. Every night, she saw his face, felt his touch, heard his voice whispering that he loved her. She would wake up with tears on her face and an ache in her chest that never went away. She hated him. She loved him. She couldn't escape either feeling. What Simone didn't know, what she had no way of knowing from inside her prison cell, was that Hyun-woo had never abandoned her. From the moment she was arrested, he had been working tirelessly to save her. The reason he didn't visit, the reason he stayed away, was strategy. His lawyers had warned him that any contact between them would be used as evidence of conspiracy. The prosecution was watching his every move, waiting for him to slip up, hoping to connect him to the charges they had pinned on Simone. If he visited her, they would both go down. So Hyun-woo did the hardest thing he had ever done in his life. He stayed away from the woman he loved while she suffered for crimes she didn't commit. But he never stopped fighting for her. He hired the best investigators money could buy. He deployed his men to dig into every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every connection that led back to the real culprit. He dismantled the corrupt officials who had been paid to secure Simone's conviction. He gathered information and built a case that would not only prove her innocence, but destroy everyone who had conspired against her. And slowly, the truth began to emerge. Kim Sung-ho had orchestrated everything. He had planted the evidence, manipulated the footage, bribed the witnesses. He had used the warehouse raid as an opportunity to eliminate Simone, believing that without her, Hyun-woo would return to the cold, calculating leader he had been before love softened him. But Sung-ho had underestimated his boss. When Hyun-woo discovered the truth, his rage was terrifying to behold. The other men in the organization had never seen him like this, had never witnessed the cold fury that transformed his handsome face into something truly frightening. Sung-ho tried to run. He packed his bags and booked a flight, and thought he could escape to a country where Hyun-woo's reach couldn't find him. He was wrong. They caught him at the airport, dragged him to a warehouse much like the one where Simone's nightmare had begun. Hyun-woo stood before him, his expression utterly devoid of mercy. What happened in that warehouse, no one outside the organization would ever know. But when it was over, Sung-ho was ready to confess to everything. And more importantly, he had provided the evidence needed to prove Simone's innocence beyond any doubt. Hyun-woo could have sent lawyers. He could have filed motions and appeals and let the legal system slowly grind toward justice. But Simone had already spent 18 months in prison for crimes she didn't commit. She had suffered enough, and Hyun-woo refused to let her spend a single day more. So he decided to do something that no one expected, something dramatic and public and utterly unlike the shadowy way he usually operated. He decided to walk into that courtroom himself and claim her in front of the entire world. Now, we're back to where we started. Back to that moment in the courtroom where everything changed. The judge was demanding order. Security guards were reaching for their weapons. Reporters were shouting questions. And Simone was standing in Hyun-woo's arms, still trembling from that kiss, completely overwhelmed by everything that was happening. He looked at her with such tenderness, such remorse, such overwhelming love that she almost couldn't breathe. He said he was sorry. He said he was so sorry for everything she had been through. He said he should have found a way to tell her, to let her know he was fighting for her. He said he never stopped loving her, not for a single moment. Simone didn't know what to say. 18 months of anger and hurt and betrayal were warring with the love that still burned in her heart despite everything. Before she could respond, the courtroom doors burst open again. More of Hyun-woo's men entered, and between them, they dragged Kim Sung-ho. He looked terrible, pale and shaking and covered in bruises that spoke of interrogations no one wanted to ask about. But he was alive, and more importantly, he was ready to talk. Hyun-woo nodded to one of his men, who produced a folder and handed it to the judge. Inside was everything: confessions, evidence, documentation of every corrupt official who had been paid to secure Simone's conviction. The truth was undeniable. The judge reviewed the documents while the courtroom waited in stunned silence. His face grew paler with every page he turned. Finally, he looked up at Simone with an expression that might have been shame. He said in light of this new evidence, he was ordering an immediate dismissal of all charges. He said Miss Adeyemi was free to go. Simone's knees buckled. If Hyun-woo hadn't been holding her, she would have collapsed right there on the courtroom floor. She was free. After 18 months of hell, after losing everything she had built, after believing that the man she loved had abandoned her, she was finally free. Her mother's cry of joy echoed through the courtroom. Her sister was running toward her, tears streaming down her face. And everywhere she looked, people were staring at her with a mixture of shock and something that might have been respect. But Simone only had eyes for Hyun-woo. She pulled back slightly and looked up at him. She asked why he did it this way. She asked why he came here publicly, why he exposed himself. Hyun-woo cupped her face in his hands and stroked his thumbs across her cheekbones. He said because he wanted the world to know. He said he wanted everyone to see that she was innocent, that she had been wronged, and that anyone who came for her would have to go through him first. He said he was done hiding in the shadows. He said if he was going to love her, he was going to do it in the light. The weight of his words settled over Simone like a warm blanket. This man, this powerful, dangerous, complicated man, had just declared his love for her in front of cameras and judges and the entire world. He had sacrificed his anonymity, his safety, his carefully constructed image, all to clear her name and bring her home. She should have been furious with him. Part of her was still furious. The 18 months of suffering didn't just disappear because he had swooped in at the last moment like some kind of dark night. But standing there in his arms, feeling his heartbeat against her chest, seeing the genuine remorse and love in his eyes, Simone felt something else too. Hope. For the first time in 18 months, she felt hope. She said they had a lot to talk about. Hyun-woo nodded, his expression serious. He said he knew. He said he would spend the rest of his life making it up to her if she would let him. Simone looked around the courtroom at the chaos they had created, at the reporters still snapping pictures, at the security guards who had no idea what to do, at Sung-ho being dragged away to face justice. Then she looked back at the man who had turned her world upside down in every possible way. She said he had better have a good car waiting outside because she never wanted to see the inside of a prison again. Hyun-woo's face broke into the most beautiful smile she had ever seen. He said he had a whole fleet waiting. He said he would take her anywhere she wanted to go. And with that, he swept her up in his arms and carried her out of the courtroom like she weighed nothing at all. Now stop right here. If you're feeling this story, if your heart is racing and you need to know what happens next between Simone and Hyun-woo, I need you to show some love. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me what you think Simone should do next, and if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? We're just getting to the good part. Let's continue. The car that waited outside was a black Rolls-Royce with tinted windows so dark no one could see inside. Hyun-woo placed Simone gently in the back seat and slid in beside her, immediately pulling her close. The moment the door closed, the outside world disappeared. The shouting reporters, the flashing cameras, the chaos of the courthouse. All of it faded away until it was just the two of them in this cocoon of leather and luxury. Simone should have pushed him away. She should have demanded answers, explanations, apologies. But she was exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. 18 months of fighting to survive, of hardening herself against despair, of pretending she didn't care anymore. It had taken everything out of her. So instead of pushing him away, she let herself sink into his embrace. Hyun-woo held her like she was precious, like she might break, like he couldn't quite believe she was really there. He said he had dreamed about this moment every single night. He said he had pictured holding her, kissing her, telling her how sorry he was. He said the reality was better than any dream. Simone pressed her face against his chest and breathed in his familiar scent. Even after everything, it still felt like home. She asked where they were going. He said somewhere safe. He said somewhere they could talk without being interrupted. The car drove for what felt like hours, leaving the city behind and winding through mountains that Simone didn't recognize. Eventually, they arrived at a traditional Korean estate hidden among the trees, beautiful and isolated and clearly very old. Hyun-woo explained that it had belonged to his grandmother. He said it was the one place that wasn't connected to his organization, wasn't on any official records, wasn't known to anyone except his closest family. He said it was the safest place in the country. He helped her out of the car and led her inside, where staff members waited with warm food and fresh clothes. Simone realized with a start that she was still wearing her prison uniform, a stark orange reminder of everything she had endured. A kind-faced older woman led her to a bathroom that was bigger than her old apartment. A massive tub was already filled with hot water and rose petals, and soft towels were stacked nearby. Simone stripped off the prison uniform and sank into the water, feeling 18 months of tension begin to melt away. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the bath water, as she finally allowed herself to feel everything she had been suppressing. She cried for the time she had lost. She cried for the fear and loneliness and despair. She cried for the moments she had believed that Hyun-woo had truly abandoned her. And she cried with relief that it was finally over. When she emerged from the bath, she found beautiful clothes laid out for her. A soft sweater in deep burgundy and comfortable pants that fit perfectly. Someone had anticipated her size exactly, and she suspected she knew who. She found Hyun-woo waiting for her in a sitting room with a fire crackling in the hearth. He had changed too, out of his formal suit and into simpler clothes that made him look almost approachable. Almost. He stood when she entered, his eyes drinking in the sight of her like she was water in a desert. He said she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Simone sat down across from him, keeping some distance between them. She wasn't ready to fall back into his arms, no matter how much her body wanted to. She said she needed to understand. She said she needed to know everything, from the beginning. Hyun-woo nodded. He had expected this. And so he told her. He told her about the morning she was arrested, how he had received the news while he was in a meeting with international partners who couldn't be interrupted, how he had nearly killed the messenger in his fury, how he had immediately wanted to storm the police station and tear it apart with his bare hands. But his advisors had stopped him. They had warned him that such a move would only make things worse, would tie him to Simone in a way that the prosecution could use against both of them. They had begged him to be strategic, to fight this war with intelligence rather than emotion. Hyun-woo said it was the hardest thing he had ever done. He said staying away from her, not visiting, not calling, not sending any message that could be traced, it had felt like cutting out his own heart. But he had done it because he believed it was the only way to save her. He told her about the investigation, how he had spent millions of dollars tracking down the truth, how his men had worked around the clock, following every lead, interrogating every witness, how he had slowly unraveled the web of lies that Sung-ho had constructed. He told her about the moment he discovered Sung-ho's betrayal, how the realization had hit him like a physical blow. A man he had trusted, a man who had been by his side for years, had done this to the woman he loved out of jealousy and resentment. He told her about the confrontation with Sung-ho. He didn't give her details, and she didn't ask for them. Some things were better left in the shadows. And he told her about the decision to go public, how his entire organization had advised against it, warning him that exposing himself could have consequences he couldn't predict, how he had listened to their concerns and then ignored every single one. He said he didn't care about the consequences. He said all he cared about was her. He said he would burn his entire empire to the ground if that's what it took to make her happy again. Simone listened to all of it, her emotions swinging between anger and understanding and something that felt dangerously like forgiveness. She asked him why he didn't find a way to tell her. She said she had spent 18 months believing he had abandoned her. She said she had gone to sleep every night with his betrayal weighing on her heart. Hyun-woo closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were glistening with unshed tears. He said he tried. He said he paid guards to carry messages, but they were discovered and fired. He said he tried to get people on the inside to talk to her, but Sung-ho's reach extended even into the prison. He said every attempt he made was blocked, and he was terrified that his interference would make things worse for her. He said he knew it wasn't enough. He said nothing could make up for what she had suffered. He said he would understand if she could never forgive him. Simone looked at this man, this powerful, feared, supposedly heartless mafia boss, and she saw the truth in his eyes. He was broken. Whatever she had suffered, he had suffered too, in his own way. The guilt and helplessness had eaten at him just as the despair and loneliness had eaten at her. They were both wounded, both scarred, both forever changed by what had happened. The question was whether they could heal together or whether the damage was too great. Simone stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the peaceful mountains. She thought about everything she had been through, everything she had lost, everything that had been taken from her. And then she thought about the moment in the courtroom. That kiss, that declaration, the way Hyun-woo had looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. She turned back to face him. She said she wasn't ready to forgive him. Not yet. She said the pain was still too fresh, and the wounds were still too raw. She said she needed time to process everything, to find herself again, to figure out who she was after 18 months of being someone else's nightmare. Hyun-woo nodded, his expression accepting even though she could see the pain it caused him. But then she continued. She said she wasn't ready to let him go either. She said what they had before everything fell apart. It was real. She said she had tried to convince herself it wasn't, had tried to harden her heart against him, but she couldn't. She said she still loved him, despite everything. Hope flickered in Hyun-woo's eyes. Simone walked over to him and took his hands in hers. She looked up at him with a mixture of vulnerability and strength. She said she wanted to try. She said she wanted to rebuild what they had, slowly, carefully, with honesty and communication this time. She said she needed him to promise that he would never shut her out again, no matter how noble his reasons. Hyun-woo brought her hands to his lips and kissed them gently. He promised. He said he would tell her everything from now on. He said no more secrets, no more protection through isolation. He said they would face whatever came together. Simone leaned forward and rested her forehead against his. She said he should know that she wasn't the same woman who went to prison. She said 18 months had changed her. She said she was harder now, more cynical, more aware of how cruel the world could be. Hyun-woo pulled her close and wrapped his arms around her. He said he knew. He said he loved the woman she was before, and he would love the woman she had become. He said they would learn each other all over again. They stood there for a long time, holding each other by the fire, two damaged people finding solace in each other's arms. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There was too much pain, too much trauma, too much that needed to be worked through. But it was a beginning, a second chance that neither of them had dared to hope for. The weeks that followed were a strange mixture of healing and adjustment. Simone stayed at the mountain estate, slowly recovering from her ordeal. She ate proper food for the first time in months, slept in a bed that didn't hurt her back, and spent hours walking through the gardens, relearning how to exist in a world where she wasn't constantly on guard. Hyun-woo visited as often as he could, but his organization demanded attention. The public declaration at the courthouse had sent shockwaves through the underground world, and he had to manage the fallout. Rival families saw his display of emotion as weakness. Allies questioned his judgment, and the authorities, embarrassed by the revelation of corruption in Simone's case, were looking for any excuse to take him down. But Hyun-woo handled it all with the cold efficiency that had made him feared in the first place. He eliminated threats before they could materialize. He strengthened alliances with strategic marriages between families and business deals that benefited everyone. And he made it abundantly clear that anyone who threatened Simone would face consequences too terrible to imagine. When he was with her, though, all of that hardness melted away. He would arrive at the estate with gifts, books he thought she might like, her favorite foods from restaurants in Seoul, clothes and fabrics so soft they felt like clouds against her skin. But more than the material things, he gave her his attention, his devotion, his unwavering presence. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. He told her about his childhood, about the pressure of being the heir to an empire built on blood. She told him about growing up in Lagos, about her dreams and fears and the path that had led her to Korea. They shared their scars, both visible and invisible, and slowly began to trust each other again. The physical intimacy returned gradually too. It started with touches, hands held during walks, fingers brushed against cheeks, arms wrapped around waists. Each contact was electric, charged with the memory of what they had been and the promise of what they could become. Their first kiss after the courthouse happened on a rainy evening, 3 weeks after her release. They were sitting on the porch, watching the storm roll through the mountains, when Simone turned to him and pressed her lips against his. It was gentle at first, tentative, both of them testing the waters. But then Hyun-woo pulled her closer, and the gentleness gave way to need. 18 months of longing poured out of them, and when they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless. That night, Simone invited him to stay. She wasn't ready for everything, not yet. But she wanted him beside her, wanted to fall asleep with his arms around her and wake up to his face in the morning. She wanted to remind herself that this was real, that she wasn't dreaming, that she had actually made it through the nightmare. Hyun-woo held her all night long, his body curved around hers protectively. And for the first time since her arrest, Simone slept without nightmares. As the months passed, Simone began to rebuild her life. She couldn't go back to her old job. The scandal, even though she had been cleared, had made her radioactive in the entertainment industry. No company wanted to be associated with someone who had been publicly connected to the Park organization. But Simone was resourceful. She had always been resourceful. She started her own translation business, working remotely with international clients who didn't care about Korean gossip. Her skills were excellent, her rates were competitive, and word of mouth spread quickly. Within 6 months, she had more work than she could handle. She also reconnected with her family. Her mother and sister flew to Korea to see her, and for 2 weeks, the mountain estate was filled with laughter and Nigerian food and conversations in Yoruba that made Simone feel connected to her roots again. Her mother was wary of Hyun-woo at first. Any mother would be, learning that her daughter was involved with a man whose business was violence and shadows. But she saw the way he looked at Simone, the way he deferred to her, the way he genuinely listened when she spoke. And slowly, reluctantly, she began to accept him. Her sister was less restrained. She took one look at Hyun-woo and declared that Simone had won the lottery. Then she demanded a full tour of his car collection, which Hyun-woo provided with amusement. By the time they left, the family had reached an understanding. They might not fully approve of Simone's choices, but they trusted her to know what was best for her own life. Simone also made peace with her new reality. She was part of Hyun-woo's world now, fully and completely. She attended events by his side, met with his associates, learned the unwritten rules of the underground society she had joined. She wasn't naive about what it meant, didn't pretend that the money funding her lifestyle came from legitimate sources. But she also didn't judge. She had seen the corruption in the so-called legitimate world. She had been destroyed by a system that was supposed to protect the innocent. In comparison, Hyun-woo's organization, with all its violence and darkness, had been the one to save her. Maybe that said something terrible about the world. Or maybe it just said something true about power and justice and who really controlled them. Either way, Simone had made her choice. A year after her release, Hyun-woo took her back to Seoul. He had purchased a new penthouse in a different building, wanting a fresh start, wanting a home that wasn't haunted by memories of the morning she was arrested. The new place was even more impressive than the old one, with floor-to-ceiling windows and an infinity pool and a closet that was bigger than most apartments. But Simone's favorite feature was the library, an entire room filled with books in multiple languages, with comfortable chairs and soft lighting and a fireplace that crackled on winter evenings. It was her sanctuary, her retreat, and Hyun-woo had designed it specifically for her. Living together as a couple, openly and officially, took some adjustment. Hyun-woo was used to operating on his own schedule, disappearing for days when business required, returning without explanation. Simone was used to independence, to handling everything herself, to not relying on anyone for anything. They clashed sometimes, argued about his protectiveness, her stubbornness, his secrets, her need for space. They said things they regretted and stormed off to different rooms and lay awake at night wondering if they had made a mistake. But they always came back to each other, always talked it through, always found their way to the other side of the conflict stronger than before. Because that's what real love was. Not some fairy tale where everything was perfect, but a choice, made every single day, to stay and fight for each other. And Simone and Hyun-woo had both chosen. 2 years after the day he kissed her in that courtroom, Hyun-woo took Simone back to the courthouse. She didn't understand why at first. The building held terrible memories for her, memories she had worked hard to process and move past. But he insisted, promising that it would be worth it. They arrived in the evening, after the courthouse was closed. Hyun-woo led her inside, past security guards who nodded respectfully, down hallways that echoed with their footsteps. He stopped in front of the same courtroom where she had been convicted, where her life had fallen apart, where he had swept in and changed everything. Simone asked what they were doing there. Hyun-woo turned to face her and took both her hands in his. He said this was the place where he almost lost her forever. He said this was the place where he made a promise to himself, that if he ever got her back, he would never let her go again. Then he dropped to one knee. Simone's heart stopped. He pulled out a ring, a stunning diamond set in a band of black and gold, as if representing both of them intertwined. He said that Simone Adeyemi had come into his life like a hurricane, shaking everything he thought he knew about himself. He said she had made him want to be better, to be worthy of her love. He said he knew he was not an easy man to love, that his world was dark and dangerous and full of threats. But he also said that he would spend every day of his life protecting her, cherishing her, putting her first. He asked her to marry him. He asked her to be his wife, his partner, his equal in all things. He asked her to let him love her for the rest of their lives. Simone looked down at this man, this complicated, dangerous, devoted man who had crashed into her life and refused to leave. She thought about everything they had been through, all the pain and the healing and the growth. And then she said yes. The wedding was 6 months later, a small ceremony at the mountain estate where she had recovered. Only their closest family and friends attended. Simone wore a traditional Korean hanbok that had been modified with Nigerian touches, honoring both of the cultures that had shaped her. Hyun-woo wore white, a symbolic choice that made his men uncomfortable but made Simone smile. They exchanged vows they had written themselves. Hers were full of humor and heart, making everyone laugh and cry at the same time. His were quiet and intense, words that wrapped around her like armor. When they kissed as husband and wife, it felt like coming home. The reception was a mixture of Korean and Nigerian traditions, with food from both cuisines and music that had everyone dancing. Simone's mother cried happy tears. Her sister flirted shamelessly with one of Hyun-woo's younger associates. And Hyun-woo's men, hardened criminals who had seen terrible things, watched their boss hold his wife like she was made of starlight and felt their own hearts soften just a little. That night, alone in their room at the estate, Simone and Hyun-woo lay tangled together in the aftermath of passion. She traced the tattoos on his chest, the symbols of his organization, the marks that told the story of who he was. She asked if he ever regretted it. All the choices that had led him to this life. Hyun-woo was quiet for a moment. Then he said the only thing he had ever regretted was not protecting her better. He said everything else, the violence and the shadows and the weight of his family's legacy, it had all led him to her. And for that, he couldn't regret it. Simone kissed him softly. She said she didn't regret anything either. She said even the prison, even the pain, it had all made her who she was. And who she was exactly who she wanted to be. They fell asleep wrapped around each other. Two people who had found light in the darkness, love in the chaos, and home in each other's arms. And somewhere in Seoul, the whispers spread through the underground. The park organization had a new queen, a black woman from Nigeria who had walked through fire and emerged unbroken. A woman who commanded respect with a glance and loyalty with a word. A woman who stood beside the most powerful man in the shadows and made him stronger. They called her the Phoenix, the one who rose from the ashes. And they knew better than to ever cross her. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. Your support means everything to me and to this channel. If this story touched your heart, If you felt something for Simone and Hyun-woo, please take a second to hit that subscribe button and join the Afro Korea Stories family. Drop a like so I know you enjoyed it, and leave a comment telling me what you want to hear next. Do you want another Mafia romance? A different kind of story? I read every single comment, and I create content based on what you ask for. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next story.